The making of Witchouse 2. I don't care how many ways you kill a villain, they can always be resurrected. I want to play Lilith again.
I think initially I was probably just terrified of the fact of going to Romania. I mean, I've never been out of the country unless you count Niagara Falls, Canada. I had been making movies in Ohio since '85 when we did The Dead Next Door, and had sort of degenerated to doing a bunch of shot-on-video movies that, to varying success. Some of them were better than others, but I kind of felt at one point that I was spinning my wheels and there was just no forward motion in doing movies like that.
I think JR moving west was a great idea. You know, he had done everything that he could do in Akron. You know, he had made a reputation for himself in California.
I had been out here, it was like April of '97, we had finished Bloodletting and I had licensed it and got rid of the magazine that I was doing and came out here and kind of started bumming around just doing whatever. And Dave Dakota had been out here when I had been helping two filmmakers from Wisconsin, Don Adams and Harry Picardi, finish a movie that they were making called Sleepwalker. Dave Dakota caught a glimpse of what we were doing. We were like doing the sound mix in my living room, and he was sort of fascinated by the whole process. And at the time I was using the Amiga for audio. It was like a little 8-track sound mix or whatever, but he was just really fascinated by it, and he was talking to Charlie Band at Full Moon about doing another set of movies for him. The first one was something that was going to be called Shrieker, and he was like, well, what would it take to have you edit and do all the sound mix on this? And he goes, I'm going to shoot it on 35 anamorphic, and it's going to be, you know, it'll sort of be a new testing ground for the stuff that I was doing, and I was really fascinated with the idea of doing that. This was sort of like Dave's secret thing in North Hollywood. Nobody knew what he was doing. They were at Hollywood and Vine in Hollywood, and he had just kind of taken this footage away to have it edited by some mysterious person that nobody knew.
I don't know if many people know this, but he's an incredible editor. He's really good. So it was no surprise to me at all that somebody had come to him to finish the movies.
When I sit and edit a movie, she's usually looking over my shoulder and knows sort of the exact direction that I want to take it in, and she's sort of an embellishment of what I'm already doing. She gives you know, favorable input into, you know, ways to make things better.
And I thought it was really exciting at the time. I was a huge fan of Full Moon and Full Moon movies, so it was fun. Yeah, Charlie Band and Full Moon, and yeah. Charlie,
who is like very, very persuasive person, had made a lot of promises to get me in there, and one of the promises that he made was to direct a movie, which of course he knew exactly what button to push because that was what I wanted to get back into and that's what I wanted to do. So he basically said, look, if you come in here and do this after a period of time, we'll get you directing something. He goes, we're doing this Film Monsters series.
Film Monsters. A chilling new series that brings classic monsters into your home.
He said, which one do you want to do? And I said, boy, I've always wanted to make a mummy movie. That was my thing. He had a script, I think, for a lot of the other ones, but not The Mummy Reborn for some reason. So I said, well, can I find you a writer and so I can kind of develop this on my own? And he said, sure.
He called and asked if I would be interested in submitting some ideas. He seemed to enjoy them, so he asked me to write the script.
I knew that was kind of right up his alley because he's very good with those sort of things. I just thought I had a good feeling that he would be the right person to write it. Doug and I came up with the story for The Mummy Reborn, and we actually took it into getting the script written. And then I think the Film Monster series, for whatever reason, Charlie decided to pull the plug on the series, and so that got canceled. So I was like, oh, here we go. My opportunity is now lost, and I'm never going to get to do anything. And so another few months go by, and he starts talking about the next set of features, Full Moon features, that he was going to do. And one of them was a thing called Fear.com, which he wanted to change to HorrorVision.com. It was very sort of Videodrome, X-Files thing.
He was called in to Charlie's office for a meeting about that, and I think the next thing you knew, there was talk of Witchouse 2, and JL was going to direct that.
And I get into this meeting, and he immediately starts talking about how well Witchouse had done. Witchouse was a movie that Ariana had played Lilith in, and it had been shot in Romania. Dave Dakota did it under one of his million aliases. It had shipped really big. I mean, it was just amazing how well this movie had done. He just kind of blurts out of nowhere. He's like, well, we're going to do this Witchouse too. How would you like to do it? And I'm thinking, sure.
Truthfully, my initial reaction when JR was offered Witchouse 2 was like, oh great, since I'd already done the first one. It was like, yeah, I'm gonna be in this.
I had said, same house, same Lilith, different story, and no returning characters or any of that, but Doug had the idea to add this scientific element to it, this whole DNA thing that Professor Sparrow gets infected with with Lilith's DNA. Charlie had talked about shooting the movie on digital video in LA, and then he had talked about shooting it on 35 in Romania. We kept going back and forth even as we were writing the script. So one of the safety valves that I had written into the script was that the camcorder would be a part of the movie.
Well, I think the beginning's very clever to anybody that is a fan of JR's and knows his background, because I think you see JR's name and you expect it to be on video. So we do this whole parody of Blair Witch on video, and then all of a sudden it cuts to 35, and it's like, ha, out with the old and in with the new.
There's not a lot of communication in the pre-production phase in the U.S. between the Romanians and you when you're, when I'm casting and everything. You really go to Romania and you have 10 or 11 days to prep this movie. You can visualize it however you want in your mind and get the cast that you want, but once you get over there, it's suddenly you have to sort of think on your feet, and it becomes a new thing. When I got there, I met the director of photography, Gabi Kosuth, and saw the locations that we would be shooting at and things like that. Really shaped it more than anything, the choices that I made in doing that. And we gave it this very weird European feel, even though it's supposed to take place in Covington County, Massachusetts or whatever. It ultimately wound up playing more like this, bizarro Euro movie of some sort. And the DP had a lot to do with that. He was very sort of old school director of photography, and every shot was a work of art, and he really was sort of willing to take it where I wanted to go in the same direction. But I did definitely have to fall back on the resources of the stuff that I had learned on my previous movies, where I was totally in control of everything and had to wear multiple hats.
I'm there, I'm ready, let's make it. Charlie, let's make Witchouse 2.
It was almost sort of whether Ariana wanted to do it or not. I wanted her to reprise her character and broaden Lilith a little more.
The one good thing about this role, that Lilith this time out, is I don't start as Lilith. I start as this very kind of, not necessarily uptight, but sexually repressed, kind of down as far as she's not really made up, and average-looking professor. And she goes through all these stages. She's possessed by Lilith.
People! Today, I want DNA samples from each of the remaining corpses. Then we will be returning back here to process them ASAP.
Is that it?
I'm sorry.
Once she realized I was doing Witchouse 2, she never came to me and said, can I not be in makeup? Could I do something else? It was sort of my idea to say, well, let's give her the opportunity to be another character that becomes Lilith.
I didn't really think about it, but it is Witchouse 2, so...
I don't think I realized it until we had edited the movie together and I sort of watched it, that this whole movie has this weird duality theme going through it, and of course it's Witchouse 2, and you've got these two characters that played, two different characters, so it's like 2 by 2 by 2 somehow.
Charles Band and I made a movie called The Eliminators back in a long time ago, almost 15 years ago, in Spain.
Doug had written this sheriff character, and even when I was reading the script, the treatment that he had outlined had originally Lilith was really doing the killing, and at some point we had introduced this whole murder mystery. We wanted it to go in a different direction, and one of the ways to do that was to introduce the Angus character.
Sometimes the innocent must suffer for the good of all. When I read it, I wanted to do the role very badly, and because it was a very unique role.
I was more concerned about that because Ariana's thing is Lilith. It's like we know she's got to go from the homely girl to the sex pot seductress, which that's easier. You know we're going to lead up to Lilith, so okay, that's one thing. But here we had a guy who's doing this whole Scooby-Doo transformation where you're like, playing the sheriff in the sunglasses and the whole 9 yards, and then suddenly he has to whip that off at one point and be convincing as this totally opposite character. Growing up as a kid, I mean, I knew him in movies like Grizzly, and I drove him nuts once we cast him, bringing up movies like that.
Grizzly was one of my favorite horror genre movies that I ever did, and probably the most successful one I ever did. It's made a ton of money.
I remember when we were going to cast him, I was really intimidated. I was like, because Grizzly, he'll probably kill me for saying this, but...
That he thought I was just, as he put it, a little weird about these movies.
I'm glad he saw it. I worked with another buddy of ours because he saw Simon, King of the Witches, and so these old horror movies that I did long ago are now paying off in my sunset years.
I loved Grizzly. I grew up with that movie, and he does such a good job in it. And you can tell the movie's very ad-libbed, and really good actor.
I stand solidly upon the horror sci-fi genre in general. The two least respected in some ways are horror sci-fi and westerns, and those are the two most fun kinds of films to make. Doing the dual role of Angus and the sheriff, I thought I've never done that, where I could play the two entirely different people and try to fool the audience. You have to just forget about the dual role and decide that you're two different people in two different shows. I mean, you can't allow that to creep into your thoughts as you're preparing as an actor.
Just very fun. It gave me a lot of good advice. Just right on. We have the same kind of approach, I think. Just get in there and do it.
I don't think I totally was convinced that it was going to work until I showed the movie to other people, and people who knew Andy Prine and knew who he was, and they would watch the sheriff scenes and not really say anything, and then the minute he comes on as Angus in his interview, they were like, oh yeah, that's the guy from this movie or that movie, and we know that guy, and it's like, but it's the same guy that, was earlier in the movie as a sheriff, and they totally had no idea. And that's when I knew, okay, we did it, it worked.
Of course. I'm sure there are a few sites around here worth checking out.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Well, actually, I got the part before I read the script. So I thought, there's got to be a catch here. There's got to be nudity or something in it. So when I read it, I was pleasantly surprised.
I had a clear vision of exactly what she looked like and how she should act when I read the script. And Elizabeth came in, I think, on the first day of auditioning. And I immediately knew, I was like, I don't even want to read anybody else. This is Stephanie. I should just stop now and hire her.
I got the script a week before we left, so I was madly trying to prepare for this character on the plane. And then once I got there, we started shooting the very next day after I got there, because I came a day after the cast. And so working with jet lag in another country was very difficult. In fact, the first 2 days, it just flew by. Like, I don't even remember half of it.
Makeup effects in Romania.
In terms of makeup effects, I knew that Lilith was going to be less than the first one. In terms of the hair and just the general makeup and everything. And Dave Lang had done some conceptual artwork for me before I left for Romania to use as a guide. And I discussed things with David Barton, who wound up doing the makeup effects with me, and he had started with me on Dead Next Door 15 years ago. There were little touches that we did that most people probably wouldn't even notice. Lilith's earlobes are a little bit longer than normal. The contacts were these kind of funky green contacts, which in a lot of shots you don't really see them clearly, but they're there, and they make her face have this sort of unique, weird appearance. And the teeth were different from Witchouse 1. They were, a little bit bigger and a little bit nastier looking.
These teeth are sharp.
Yeah.
We did all the makeup here, basically. I was fitted for contacts, and they did molds of my teeth. And Dave Snyder actually went to Romania with us and put the makeup on and applied it.
The biggest one, I think, for me was the look of Lilith's acolytes. And the original sketches, they were going to be bald. It was like a brand, like somebody would brand a horse with a symbol. We had this sort of unique symbol for them, and then they would have, you know, regular appliances. And kind of became apparent immediately that the bald part was going to be really difficult because bald caps, of course, lend themselves to problems. So that was really the only sacrifice that we had to make in terms of the makeup effects. And we wound up, instead of the symbol being on top of the head, we moved it to the forehead, which kind of was almost, I think, as cool anyways, because it really does look like Lilith had sort of branded them with her, you know, unique symbol. Probably the biggest thing was the eyes. David Barton came up with some LEDs that would be bright enough to register on film, and even when I got to Romania, when they first put the makeup on them, I had to DP check them, and he's like, oh, they'll be great, don't worry about it, they'll pop right out, and he was totally right. When we did the telecine, they're just, you know, like beacons of light, they really look good. As far as the computer effects, I guess one of the things I did not like about Witchouse 1 was that when Lilith is killing, it sort of is resorting to this throwing lightning bolts and things that just didn't seem very supernatural to me. They seemed more like something that should be in some other setting. So I wanted to do something that was more in keeping with the supernatural element of it.
I've worked for JR, you know, a lot of times in the past. I mean, mostly it was on makeup effects, and most of the time I think I know what he's looking for when he tells me. I mean, a lot of times I work for a lot of people and they say, you know, I kind of don't like this, and it's really vague.
And probably the big showpiece scene was this sort of disease or sickness that Lilith has created, and it's sort of swirling in the air and making this green glow in this attic.
Well, at first I was like, you know, God, how are we going to do that? I've never done anything like that before, but I think it turned out pretty well. After Effects is the main program that I use. That pretty much, you know, covers everything, you know, lasers and masking out and blue screening. Right now, the sequence that I think turned out the best, and I actually have completed for the most part, is the climax where Angus is standing and then he walks into the green disease mist. And how that was composed is JR shot the shot of Angus. I think he was walking into a large Chinese lantern that was glowing green, and then he shot a background plate of the light without Angus in it, and I would take that, I would mask Angus out walking into the light, and you know, then pre-compose the shots, and then do another layer yet of the green energy disease stuff, and then lay that in as well, and the three layers actually, you know, they combine to make one well thought out shot.
And I've always been the type to learn as much as I can about every facet of the movies, but the post is definitely where I like to spend time editing. I like to spend time learning about the CGI and watching the process happen to sort of know better how it happens.
You know, being able to place things here and there, knowing, you know, how much a thing is supposed to glow, or, you know, a color of a certain thing, or, you know, just the overall look of an effect. You know, the art comes in handy.
And sound, I mean, the first couple shows that I did for Full Moon, Shrieker and Curse of the Puppet Master, I did those sound mixes largely by myself. I had initially trained Don Adams and Harry Picardi, who were editors. As it grew, it became obvious to me that, well, we need to find guys that sort of know this stuff better than we do. And Don and Harry were sort of like, well, we're kind of done with sound cutting. We'd like to go back to picture cutting. I wanted to edit movies again. So I found, Don Adams had actually found a guy named Chris Jacobson through another sound house that Full Moon had actually been using prior to that.
I think Don Adams was doing some ADR there, and one day Michael mentioned that you need somebody to do some good ADR editing. I'm the man to do it. He planted a seed, obviously, because probably within a few months, I think it was Don that called me and said that they were looking for a mixer.
Dave Dakota had introduced me to a guy named Maui Holcomb, who had been a post coordinator.
Well, I was working as a post-production coordinator on typical movies like these for a different company, and just got tired of answering the phone all day and sending faxes all day, so I learned how to operate Pro Tools.
Maui wanted to get into sound editing. He just, for whatever reasons, that was what he wanted to do. He wanted to learn it, and he'd taken some Pro Tools classes. And
I've been mixing for a couple of years now, and Pro Tools is the way to go, I think, to mix. It's just that you can automate any parameter you need to. I mean, everything can be automated. But Pro Tools has upped the ante a little bit and provided more power for mixers.
Well, in a lot of our horror movies, you know, you want to make the sound for the hits and the killing and the blood, you want to make it as big as possible. I mean, you have to look, if somebody's getting their head chopped off, you have to just think about every little part of that, like bones breaking or blood splashing, or, and then just generally try and make everything as big as possible. And first I would watch the scene and I'd try and figure out exactly what's going to happen. I mean, the witch is going to fly up, there's going to be, what sort of sound is that going to make? Then if the person's getting attacked, I mean, I'll choose the sounds based on all the different elements of that. And I'll find that pretty much basically on CDs. And then we have hard drives that have sort of a library of sounds that we've accumulated over the last few months. Import them into my Pro Tools session and put each one on a different track. Basically just hit play and listen to what it sounds like. And then from there, you can cut off the end of certain sounds depending on how much you imported in from the CD, or cut off the back of it, and then I would raise or lower the level of each individual sound. And
well, there's definitely some things with Witchouse 2 which puts it above a lot of the Full Moon projects that I've dealt with. As far as I know, this will be the first 5.1 surround mix for a Full Moon project. I'm trying to overlook a lot of things that are happening, like dialogue editing and ADR, which is also known as looping or automatic dialogue replacement, is a process of taking out noisy or unacceptable lines and taking that and replacing it with a cleaner version recorded in a studio in sync with the picture. We'll go into the studio and with the dedicated software that we have, Pro Tools and Gallery ADR Studio. It's a software that will actually run Pro Tools and it'll cue the actors to when to start their line. We'll just do the process, and the director will be there to direct the actors as well as deciding which lines came out the best.
I think it's about time this town paid for what it's done to us.
Foley is more the movement, clothes rustling, footsteps, stuff that would be almost impossible or take months to do with sound effects editing. You know, you don't have time to place every sound effect or every movement of somebody rubbing their leg or patting somebody on the back or whatever. You just don't have time to do that, so we hire what's called a Foley walker, and they do a lot of the walking right with the picture. There'll be a mic aiming at their feet, and they'll be doing footsteps, and then we'll have different surfaces. We'll have hardwood floors, we'll have carpeted floors, and try to emulate what's happening on screen. Well, Eric Fahlberg typically does a lot of the Foley for us. You know, Eric went looking around Interlock. They recommended a Foley walker. He's a big-time Foley walker. He's done recently, I know he did the Jaws DVD remastered and remixed in 5.1.
The whole thing just kept growing, and as it got bigger and bigger, more money started to come in, and it was like, boy, we can't keep up with this. We need more people and more resources. So eventually, we just one by one, it seemed like every month, I was adding a new person, dragging somebody else into this whole thing.
Actually, I was kind of just floundering around in Ohio trying to figure out what I was going to do, and JR had moved out here, I think, like 2 years prior to that or so, and he came back to Ohio for whatever reason, and he asked me if I'd be interested in doing some visual effects.
And he's a great artist, and I knew that if he could get his hands on the computer, he could apply the art skills that he had to the computer, and it would be a great match, and I was right. You know, it's just a matter of taking a chance. It's like bring the guy out to LA, get him the hell out of Ohio, and take advantage of the, what he has to offer.
About a year into being at Full Moon, my wife Sandra started working there, and she eased her way into the post-production assistant position one way or another, and it's a lot easier, I guess, having her call me and giving me these directions and these orders, I guess, for lack of a better word, than some stranger barking out orders to me, and there's a better rapport there.
Where I had gone from actually doing hands-on editing on Shrieker and Curse of the Puppet Master and things like this, I was now just an overseer. I would just try to figure out how best to utilize everybody and make sure the work was getting done and the deadlines that were necessary. And
well, I felt like Fat Cat Post was on the 8th floor, and we kind of pulled out.
Eventually it wound up that it was better to go back to the beginning and do things the way we had started, which was with the skeleton crew, and doing less projects.
Been a really rewarding experience, and Chris is a great mixer. I've learned a lot from him as well as from JR and the other guys here, and it's nice to have such a relaxed, intimate environment.
Once we moved out of the 8th floor, I was less responsible for it. I mean, ultimately, I think in Charlie's eyes, it's me and whoever my guys are. I mean, he knows I have a team of people that do it, but I was less hands-on responsible for it. In this day and age, there's no reason for a filmmaker not to spend more attention on the post process and the editing in particular, because you can literally go down to a store and buy an iMac DV and get Final Cut Pro for a reasonable amount of money and take your DV movie or whatever it is and put it in the computer and output it, and it'll look better than anything that I would have been able to do 10 years ago. I think we're telling a somewhat interesting story, and it's certainly a unique difference from Witchouse 1 to Witchouse 2, and that was my focus.
It was a classic genre picture, and I knew that if it had somebody good making it, we could make a decent film. Those kind of movies, if you have someone who's not enthusiastic, you can make the worst film. But if you have someone who loves that genre, and I could see, obviously, that JR loved it, and he's a little weird about it. And so we had a good shot at making a good picture.
And this desperate heart of mine is reaching down inside, deep down inside.
I mean, this will definitely be my swan song for Full Moon. I won't be in any more Full Moon movies. So it's kind of cool to go out this way.
Feels the same upon my shoulder. I see this curse again. Yeah, the woman I loved is gone, and I'm all alone.
It's easy for somebody to sit and watch a movie and start going, well, you know what, I could have done this better, this could have been done better, blah, 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 blah. And we've all done it, and you know, ultimately it's you can't think about it when you make a movie, or you'll just drive yourself nuts. If you sit and think about, you know, Joe Blow in Boise, Idaho is really going to just, you know, get on me if I don't do this in this movie. It's like you can't think about it. You just have to make the movie your way and hope for the best. I don't have any aspirations or expectations to make a Witchouse 3. I mean, I feel I've made my contribution, and time to move on to bigger and better things.
I put it down and I push the glass away, still crying out, but I won't hear what it says. In this cold, cold room I find that I'm still alive. After what I've taken, no more my will is breaking, and this